Your Honor, my client Vinsmoke Sanji has been baselessly accused of heinous, humiliating, and ever so horny crimes. And I, man on the internet, am here today to set the record straight. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will each hear and weigh the evidence, coming to a very twirly conclusion supported by said evidence, and you will find my client innocent. So let us commence the trial of Vinsmoke Sanji. Because there's a certain perception of Sanji in the online One Piece fan base, at least, one that I have fallen victim to myself on occasion, which is that Sanji is bad with women. And I don't think this is true. So we are going to call to the stand every woman that Sanji has attempted to flirt with throughout the series, and that of course raises the question of how many women has Sanji flirted with and or simped for? Lots is probably lots. That's like asking Dio's question of how many breads have you eaten in your life? But this impression of Sanji is actually both incorrect and out of his control. And let's begin with witness number the first being Moody, Full Body's date to Baratie, and she serves as the audience perspective of our very first encounter with Sanji. And Sanji was very forward with Moody, even inviting her to quote sample his private stock, which doesn't mean taste some wine or doesn't mean oral sex. Either way, Moody's pretty into it, and I'm definitely calling this a success for Sanji, with special points awarded because Moody was on a date with someone else at the time. And what this shows is a bit of a pattern that we'll see across Sanji's, I don't want to call it dating, but women interacting career, which is that he is incredibly suave when talking about food and dining. This is his home field, and you can tell because Moody was not a one-off aberration. In the very next chapter, Sanji is seen hitting on another woman on a date to a successful degree as well, much to her date's frustration, and in the chapter after that, he's seen simping over a woman named Roxanne, who is genuinely happy to see him. And I have to say, this is going real well. This dude has now rizzed 3 women in 3 back-to-back chapters. And whilst not strictly speaking in the Baratie arc, during Whole Cake Island, there is a flashback to Baratie where it becomes evident that Sanji has been this way ever since he was a child, charming a 4th woman by clumsily dropping her dish at the sight of her sheer beauty. So where does this impression of Sanji's overwhelming failure come from? Well, a big part of that is going to be Nami. As soon as Sanji sees Nami, he goes completely whack job overboard for her in a way that he hadn't for the previously discussed 4 women, and also in a way that he doesn't for most women going forward. Sanji gets particularly dumb around Nami, and Nami takes great advantage of this. And this is the first of many Sanji failures with Nami specifically. And what that does, right, is it forms an illusion of quantity. Sanji has struck out with Nami more times than he's encountered other women on his journey. And what that does is produce the illusion that Sanji is a perpetual failure with women in general. However, in fictional reality, what we do, right, we look at Baratie, and Sanji has an 80% success rate if you count by individual women rather than individual attempt. And we'll talk more about why Nami is immune from Sanji in a bit, because this is a very special rule that Oda has for writing One Piece. But we should also add up the rest of East Blue, because Nojiko is also exempt from any Sanji simpy sorcery, as Sanji had the predictable reaction to Nojiko, after which point she politely asked him to leave, and later on he also tries and fails to sneak a hug from Nojiko under the guise of victory celebrations. But here Sanji is hard countered by the existence of Genzo. However, during the post-Arlong celebrations, Sanji claims that he's gonna go, quote, find a girl. And to be completely fair to Sanji, we don't know how this turned out. We just cut from the celebrations to the very next day, and that's that. And during Logtown, Sanji does have a moment where we see Alvida, but there's no interaction, so we can't really count that for anything, which is very lucky on Sanji's part, mind you, because Alvida very much appreciates Sanji's style of devotion and worship, and almost certainly would have made him her slave, because Sanji has a very can-do attitude when it comes to these sorts of relationships. And another example of this later on in the series is when Sanji constructs his mental image of Big Mom and arousedly asks, what happens to those bad cooks if they're late with her sweets? But all in all, Sanji actually entered the series incredibly strong. Of the 6 East Blue women that Sanji directly flirted with, he saw success with 4 of them. And that is a 66.6% success rate. Which takes us into the Grand Line and a new era of Sanji with the introduction of Vivi and subsequent joining of Nico Robin, both of whom are going to be added to Sanji's total total, just not in the column he would like. And it needs to be noted that Sanji's reaction to Robin joining the crew is almost exactly the same as when he first met Nami. Sanji slips into this very poetic stage mode and does what he does best by serving her delicious food and drink. And this mirror is here because of one of Oda's writing rules, which is that there is to be no romance within the Straw Hat Pirates, an edict so ironclad that it's one of the only strict conditions that Oda gave to Netflix for producing the live-action series. So that's why Robin very much strolls in a very similar Nami-esque manner. But for most crew members, this rule is unnoticeable and irrelevant. However, it has a pretty massive effect on Sanji. With the Straw Hat rule, Nami, Robin, and Vivi all have to be narratively immune, which is unfortunate for him because these are the three women that Sanji spends the most time around, and so it gives the illusion that he's unsuccessful in general because he's failing with these same mostly two women over and over and over again for the past almost 3 decades. But keep the following in mind, even with all of that, at this stage, Sanji's current win-loss ratio is 4-4, perfectly balanced as all things should be. Because Alabasta Sanji was, I think, the most balanced incarnation of Sanji, as he had the perfect combination of simp and chivalry that I will refer to as simplery. And in modern One Piece, when anyone complains about Sanji, chances are it's because that balance is off. Because there was an event that happened at a certain point in One Piece, an event that happened off-page, mind you. This was during production, a behind-the-scenes change to One Piece that really threw Sanji off balance. But first, Alabasta era Sanji was smack bang perfect. For example, on Little Garden, Sanji gawks at a shirtless Nami, but then immediately gives her his suit jacket to wear. Very simp, very chivalry, very simplery. And even the fight against Bon Clay demonstrates this because Sanji is so willing and eager to see Nami's body, but he also can't bring himself to hit Bon Clay in Nami's form, even though he knows it isn't Nami. And when it comes to Vivi, yes, Sanji does have his moments of trying to look at her in the bath, and he goes a bit wild for her in that dancing girl outfit, but this is always balanced out by his dedication and reliability. In fact, Sanji has a lot less simpy moments with Vivi than I thought I remembered, because with a couple of exceptions, he's usually pretty normal around her and actually leans a lot more on the knight in shining armor idea. Lines like, "I'm sorry I missed all the action, but I'll have other chances to show my stuff. Never fear, the sleeping knight has awakened and guarantees your safety." Lines like that are a good representation of the average Vivi-Sanji interaction. But again, the perfect Sanji is a balanced Sanji. It keeps him interesting because whenever Sanji's on page, you're never quite sure which one you're gonna get. He could be about to pull off an iconically cool series moment, one that gets seared into our minds forever, or he could just be about to do something stupid and highly embarrassing. But it's those latter moments that enhance the awesome ones because you don't expect the awesome ones. They come out of nowhere and they whack you in your face. But this is also the beginning of Sanji being a bit less successful in the fictional dating realm. On Skypiea, Sanji gives Konos his best shot with the "Love is a Dilemma," falling for a fallen angel bento box, but this shot ultimately misses. Then on Long Ring Longland, Sanji almost sees some success with his preferred choice of crew member, Gina, the sexy carpenter. However, this decision was overruled by Luffy in favor of taking Foxy's Jolly Roger. So he won't count that one because we don't know how it would have worked out. And really, our next candidate after that is Caliphar, which is a crazy thought, but Water 7 Sanji was actually very much toned down compared to every other saga. It was a much more serious story and there wasn't a huge amount of opportunity for Sanji to strike. And then, when he finally got one, he got struck in the nuts because Caliphar was always, she was always going to be a bit of a rough ask. And she directly challenged Sanji's ideology by saying, "You don't need to think of me as a woman. The world we live in is not so gentle," which eventually prompts the famous line, "Even if it kills me, I won't kick a woman." And this is where Nami becomes authentically impressed by Sanji's chivalry for the first time in the series. Still, it is a loss to Caliphar. However, on Thriller Bark, Sanji, along with every male Straw Hat member, actually got a marriage proposal from Lola, so we're definitely counting that as a win, even if Sanji wasn't looking for it. But then Sabadi Archipelago brought us Kami, who Sanji was love-struck by at first sight, and part of this was primed on Thriller Bark due to the idea that, and I quote, "mermaids don't wear panties." But Kami, she's another Konos, someone who seems almost completely unaware of anything that Sanji's doing. Which brings us to Sanji's total pre-timeskip win-loss ratio, and that is 5 wins to 7 losses, which, that's still a solid 40%-ish. Yes, it is going down over time, but who among you watching would not do terrible, terrible things for a 40% hit rate? But here's where things get a bit complicated, and why pre- and post-timeskip can arguably be considered different characters. And this is all because of a man named Akira Jean-Baptiste Hattori, who we've covered covered before on this channel, but he was the editor of One Piece from Sabadi to Fishman Island. And here is how Oda describes his relationship with this particular editor. Sometimes the manga can evolve to reflect the editor's skin. So when I drew something with a little extra skin, Hattori really liked that. I was like, ooh, that worked. So maybe I got a little carried away with the fan service. That wasn't my intention. So if I'm done, I'll say that he was the editor that likes women. And Hattori has probably had one of the single biggest individual influences on One Piece aside from Oda himself. Hattori is often credited with unlocking Oda's hidden pervy potential, which immediately manifested during Amazon Lily when Sweet Pea mistook Luffy's man parts for a mushroom, and in fact during that arc, every resident of Amazon Lily was obsessed with Luffy's manshroom. But this had a huge knock-on effect for Sanji, and it's almost certainly why we had stuff like the nosebleed plotline for Post-timeskip. Because Post-timeskip Sanji became a bit of a parody of pre-timeskip Sanji. What was once a pretty well-balanced quality of simplery suddenly weighed way more in the direction of the pervy gags because Oda had been unleashed, and because Sanji had become a lot more overtly perverted, the only way to maintain some sort of balance would be that he also needed to be punished for this behavior and become less successful with women. Which you can see perfectly in his reintroduction where he steps back onto Sabadi and yells, "Gimme them ladies!" And this is a perfect illustration because Sanji used to do so well with miscellaneous background women, and here he is just completely bombing. And by the way, there are 6 women that I count running away from him here. We are going to add to his unfortunate total. In addition to sniffing the posterior of Perona and being turned to stone by the mere sight of Boa Hancock, as well as Shirahoshi later on, giving us 9 failures within a single saga, skewing us to an unfortunate ratio of 5 to 16. And look, Hattori was only the beginning, because once he raised the bar in this area, every editor then went on to meet it. In fact, it's almost as if it's become essential criteria for the job. For example, editor Naito once commented about having a child with Carrot and how this sort of diversity should be accepted in the modern world. These are the kind of people who have a pretty ridiculously strong influence on the shape of One Piece. It's not just a one-man Oda show. And I actually have a video about all of the times where editors have had a massive impact on the series for better or worse, which you should absolutely check out after finishing this one, because now I have a very surprising conclusion about Sanji coming up soon. But first, to be fair, the next few arcs did initiate a bit of a course correction. Fishman Island did go a bit overboard, and so what happened is that Sanji got some of his chivalry back. They didn't tone down the pervert factor, they just reintroduced the knight persona. A great example of this is when he saved Tashigi on Punk Hazard, saying, "I heard the sound of a lady's teardrops falling," which is a line that goes so much harder than it has any right to, although Tashigi herself still had zero interest whatsoever. Not a problem though, because a lot of other women would be struck by that Sanji charm. Monet is a minor example. Sanji asks who the hottie in the back is, and Monet takes this compliment very well. But I think the first example of post-timeskip Sanji redemption is Viola, because this interaction establishes a formula that still gets used to this very day, which is that Sanji simps for a woman who wants to kill him, but Sanji breaks his way into her heart with one genuinely touching sentence, and in Viola's case, that sentence was, "A million people might curse your name, but I will never doubt a woman's tears." After which point, Viola's impression of Sanji instantly flipped. She then betrayed the Don Quixote family and said, "You really are a hopeless man, but thank you. You lifted my heart." And later on, she also repeats that line whilst blushing. Of course, the big shame here is that Sanji had to leave Dressrosa immediately after this interaction, and they haven't seen each other since. If they had more time together, it may have turned out like Sanji's almost wife Charlotte Pudding, who also perfectly adhered to this formula of wanting to kill Sanji, but being flipped by a single genuine sentence. And in the case of Pudding, it was Sanji being breathtaken by her third eye, after which point Pudding completely fell in love with him to the same sort of wacky over-the-top degree that Sanji usually falls for other women. And also, one interaction that a lot of people tend to forget is with Sanji and Cosette. Cosette was the head chef of the Germa kitchen, who Sanji protected and praised the cooking of, which resulted in Cosette having a bit of a love moment for this here prince man. And this is a streak that continued well into Wano, particularly with Some, the geisha whose pet mouse that Sanji rescued in the fight against Queen. And after this point, Some became infatuated with Sanji, which he somehow didn't notice, but Some now works at a soba store because of Sanji and how much she loved om-nom-nomming his soba. So for a man that the internet repeatedly tells me is a complete failure with women, he certainly does have a whole lot of them completely falling for him after very quick interactions. At least one per arc starting in Dressrosa. And yes, Wano and Beyond have also brought us a string of failures as well. well. There's Yamato, Black Maria, Stussy, Lilith, York, and Hiyori, the latter of which hit Sanji particularly hard because she chose Zoro over him. Not that that's the first time that that's happened. From Sanji's perspective, Hiyori, Toshigi, and Perona have all expressed interest in Zoro over him. And that's probably why Sanji gets a little extra angry at post-timeskip Zoro, because sometimes it must feel like he's living his own NTR story where everyone he's interested in is relentlessly getting mossed. But even then, with all of that, this brings Sanji to a total win-loss ratio of 9-23, which is still a wild 28% successful. But I am about to blow you away with statistics, because there's also some Sanji incidents that we haven't accounted for, such as every time a group of enemies have seduced Sanji for their own nefarious purposes. This includes the 20 Whiskey Peak bounty huntresses, as well as the one man in the far left of the panel, and also the 4 Foxy Pirate members who prompted Sanji to say, maybe I should just let you Davy back me. And I don't know, maybe that's a euphemism, but also all of Black Maria's subordinates were on the verge of legitimately falling for Sanji. Now, all of these situations, they had ulterior motives, but POV, you're Sanji, right? You're probably gonna count it all as a dub regardless. But even if you don't, every mermaid on Fishman Island seemed to like Sanji, and at first I thought that they were oblivious to his actions. However, during the Hody Jones defeat party, we see Sanji and Brook with mermaids, and one of them is actually kissing Brook. So the mermaids genuinely like Sanji, and they were even pleading with him not to forget them and to come visit again, which is also an effect present on Wano. Sanji was very popular with the women of Wano in general. Ladies were literally lining up to taste his noodle. And of course, we also can't forget that all of the Kamabaka Kingdom fell in love with Sanji as well. These are entire civilizations falling for Sanji as if he's some sort of Cavendish. And at this point, the ratio doesn't even matter anymore, because the population of mermaids, Wano citizens, and Okama is so large that the ratio is something like 99.9999969% in Sanji's favor, which tells me that Sanji is doing pretty well. And I think that the impression of his failure definitely comes from the Straw Hat interactions, as well as the no crew romance rule, plus the enhanced Hattori era pervert humor that is still carried over to this very day, and also something I haven't gone into too much, which is anime filler, movies, and other extended media. So the issue with filler is that it's fundamentally not allowed to change whatever the status quo at the time is, so often writers have to default to using older gags. And Sanji's well-worn gag with Nami and Robin and Vivi is to try and fail with women. And that same interaction plays out with a lot of the filler characters. So if you look at the body of One Piece as a franchise, I can definitely see how it comes across, especially when the anime adds stuff to canon material as well, like Sanji actually becoming a dog for Stussy. But the truth of the matter is that Sanji is doing just fine and could realistically retire on any post-timeskip island of his choosing and live out the rest of his days in his own personal heaven.